stock are valuable, and we've really seen that in the last 12 months and maybe a bit longer now. And I suppose what I mean by that is the basic things. Animal health, will lead to healthier animals that will thrive and weigh well. Make a herd health plan now with your vet and be proactive. Look at your farm and what is the value of a kg of live weight on your farm. Can we look at options of grazing paddocks, maybe 3 days and growing every 3 weeks and keep rotating stock. Look, grazed grass will put, I suppose, a lot of live weight gain on cattle during the grazing season, and we really need to take advantage of that. It's one of our biggest advantages as a country, I suppose, really,
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, I'm joined by Teagasc Beef Specialist Niall Kerins to get an update on some of the key management tips for the weeks ahead. Niall, at the start of 2026, what's some of the key things that farmers should be considering?
I suppose 2025 has been a very good year, first of all, on farms. The past 12 months we had a really, really good beef price, by and large, I suppose, and we had a really good grass growing year as well. There were good extended grazing seasons, and a lot of fodder was gathered on farms, which really is, has been used obviously this time of the year. I suppose just thinking ahead into 2026, with good beef price, especially on farms, there might be additional revenue available, maybe to update existing handling facilities, cattle crushes, calving pens, and that kind of thing. And it's also important to emphasise there is TAMs available for those things as well. Other areas of interest might be, maybe improving grazing infrastructure, maybe some additional paddocks or water trucks, that kind of thing. And we see a lot of suckler farmers out there now looking at smart technologies around breeding, maybe breeding collars, boluses, tags, that kind of stuff. And again, there is TAMs available for that, so there are things maybe farmers could look at going to the future, and some small changes now can, make a big difference into the year ahead. And I suppose we've seen CBV grow, and its reliability grow on farms, and that's a tool that's available for farmers that are buying stock to finish, and is coming through. It's pretty accurate, I suppose, on farms by and large, and it's available both for suckler bred stock and dairy beef bred stock. So there are tools, I suppose, that we could use maybe more, and we'd encourage farmers to use more on farms into the year ahead, into 2026.
That's great, Niall, and I suppose February calving is less than 6 weeks to go. What should we be thinking about now on suckler farms?
Yeah, so I suppose it really is the calm before the storm. Sitting sort of the 1st of January, and as you say, calving is sort of maybe 4 to 6 weeks away on calves or on farms at the moment. Many farmers opt to maybe feed a pre-calving mineral to farmers, which is a really good means of, incorporating minerals into a cow's diet pre-calving. It's quite important for calf health. It improves calf vigor, improves colostrum quality, and I suppose cows generally, can recover faster after calving, which is quite important. If you are buying minerals, purchase minerals from a reputable source. Specs can vary from farm to farm and from minerals that are on the open market. I suppose we have a guide there in Teagasc, of minerals that should be maybe purchased or could be purchased, and that's available to your local advisor if you wanted it. I suppose the big thing really around minerals, if you had an issue with minerals in the past, maybe retained placentas or maybe suppressed calves and that kind of thing, the first thing we should really look at is get a mineral analysis of your silage. Grass silage makes up the most of the diet for suckler cows pre-calving. Getting a mineral analysis or even blood samples done on a random group of cows is really good idea to get a handle on what the mineral deficiencies might be on your farm. And I suppose with the results you get back from that, then you can speak to your local vet or your nutritionist or your advisor and tailor or maybe get the most suitable mineral that's out there to suit your farm. I suppose again, as just to really emphasize that point, without a proper mineral analysis, especially when you have issues in the past, could be costing the long run. So remove the doubt and get a mineral analysis done if you had an issue with minerals in the past.
And how long should that pre-calving mineral, Niall, be fed for?
Yeah, I suppose that's an important question. I suppose pre-calving minerals should ideally be fed sort of 4 to 6 weeks pre-calving, which is ideally now. That's in the powder form. A lot of farmers will dust that on top of the silage, for example. So I suppose the first thing to make sure that every cow has access to the barrier when you are feeding minerals. Every cow needs about 0.66 of a metre or over 2 feet of feeding space at the barrier. So just watch that. The next thing is just to read the label. It's kind of an obvious thing, but sometimes we forget to do that. And most pre-calving minerals, need to be fed at about 100 to 120 grams per day per cow. So just make sure, I suppose, do some calculations. If you're buying a bag of minerals, they usually kind of come maybe in a 20 or 25 kg bag, and divide into the amount of stock you are and how many days it should last and that kind of thing, and make sure you're using enough of it. I suppose another important factor as well is just to bear in mind minerals are expensive and you generally pay for what you get, and generally the dearer minerals can be of a higher spec and cheap minerals are that bit cheaper. So look, that can have a knock-on effect as well around selecting a mineral that will suit it. Keep an eye on body condition score. at this time of the year. Really thin cows might need a small bit of meal to maybe put a small bit of body condition on them. I suppose the game is, especially if calving is kind of shoving near, I suppose they might need additional concentrates just to put a bit of condition on them and keep energy levels up. And be careful as well of over fat cows. They can equally cause problems around calving. So just keep an eye on them as well, that they're not going over fat you, I suppose, on the lead up to calving. I suppose a good idea as well would be to clip cows' tails, and around their hindquarters can often get very dirty, especially if they're housed in slats, which is generally what you see on suckler farms. Dirty tails and hindquarters, I suppose, could, I suppose, trying to encourage calves to suckle, this can maybe turn calves off suckling, might make it more harder for them to suckle, especially, when they're just after being born. So, look, a lot of farmers mightn't like to be putting cows up a crush this late in the game, but I suppose if you have that opportunity to do so, it would be a good job to just to keep things clean and tight, I suppose, in the lead up to calving. So there's a few things. Minerals are quite important, as I say, and a sort of 4 to 6 weeks pre-calving is the ideal time frame to give that to cows.
And as you mentioned there, keeping an eye on body condition is very important. Like, cows were in good condition being housed, and they've been in a considerable number of weeks now at this stage.
Exactly, yeah. And I suppose, look, at even sometimes there, if calves are weaned early and cows are out that bit longer, as I said, they come in very good body condition. And obviously cows inside aren't moving a whole lot, so they can lay down fat a lot quicker. So just keep an eye on them. Now, I suppose reducing the energy on the lead up to calving could have a knock-on effect on colostrum quality. So it's just trying to balance that as well. But look, just really keep a close eye on overfat cows, maybe just to maybe keep them to one side, and just be careful of the intakes that they are getting, especially maybe if we are feeding that bit of meal to cows because maybe of poor quality silage or whatever. Often those fat cows can often be maybe bully cows, for example, and are probably eating more than what they should get. So maybe just pinning them separately, and just keep an eye on it that they're not going to get over fat on you on the lead up to calving, I suppose, is quite important.
Thinking ahead to calving, Niall, what do you see as the key things that farmers should be looking at having available on the farm?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing really, just to take it back a step from that, Catherine, would be just looking at the colostrum. Obviously when a calf is born, it needs to get colostrum into itself, as quickly as possible after calving. And the age-old rule of 3 litres within 2 hours hasn't changed and will never change, I suppose. So that's quite important, first of all, when a calf is born. Colostrum quality is critical for calf immunity, because obviously a calf is born without any antibodies within itself. I suppose, look at testing it. It mightn't happen a whole lot on suckler farms, but testing colostrum with a Brix refractometer is a good idea to have an indication as to what way colostrum quality is looking, and it should read maybe 22% or greater. And I suppose just one thing, I suppose, on the lead up to calving, maybe having some fresh colostrum available, in case you have a cow that has low levels of colostrum, in particular maybe heifers, for example, or a cow that's after hard calving. I suppose fresh colostrum has a shelf life of about 36 to 48 hours within the fridge. So just bear that in mind if you are storing some of it around calving. Frozen colostrum can last a bit longer. It's obviously kept in the freezer, and if you're doing that, then I suppose maybe put in a zip type bag that it's easy to defrost, I suppose, when it's needed. I suppose just thinking ahead, then I suppose the basic things: calving jacks, ropes, iodine gloves, lubrication, and plenty of straw. Straw should be your number one on the list when it comes to animal husbandry, and using lots of it really is quite important. We should be looking at cleaning and disinfecting calving pens and creep areas. A lot of farmers have gone down the vaccination route, around vaccinating cows for scours, to prevent scours in calves. And again, look, if you are looking at that, obviously consult with your vet as to what should you do or what could you do differently this year, when you're thinking ahead. Look at, generally speaking, it's rotavirus, and now there's a new cryptovirus that are on the market, I suppose, vaccines for that, but again, look, consult your vet on that if you are looking at that route, I suppose. I suppose then, vaccines can be very effective, but I suppose they won't mask, sort of maybe bad management, in around maybe poor animal or poor housing facilities and that kind of thing, or maybe bad management of cows pre-calving, or poor management of colostrum. For the vaccine to be effective, the calf needs to receive colostrum after calving. That's quite important. Like the vaccines work by passive immunity, so it passes from the cow through the colostrum and into the calf. And most of them, as I say, need to be done sort of 3 to 12 weeks pre-calving. So it's important to use your scan results to define that. Especially some of the new vaccines that are on the open market, some cows will require 2 shots. So again, I suppose now is the time to be looking into, should you be vaccinating cows to prevent scours in calves, as you head into, or as we head into the calving season, which is not that far away, so there are just a few things, I suppose, around the whole area around vaccination, just thinking ahead. I suppose when you are looking at vaccines, just check the site of administration for vaccines. Is it intramuscular or is it under the skin? Both of them work very, very different, so just important to familiarize yourself with that. When you are buying vaccines, just keep them in a fridge. keep them, they need to be kept in the fridge so that they last, I suppose. And some vaccines need to be mixed. You have to maybe to mix the solvent with powder. So again, just familiarize yourself with that and have a chat with your vet. If you are buying these vaccines, look, they are quite expensive and they can be quite expensive, but they can be very, very effective when they're used properly on farms. But again, just back to the age old, keep things simple. Keep, I suppose, handling facilities right, keep calving facilities clean if you can, and keep, use plenty of disinfectant as you go through the calving season. It can really help to reduce any scours and disease outbreak within the calving shed.
I think it's very important to mention there, consulting the vet, especially now reviewing calving 2025, and if any issues had arose, what can be done now to resolve issues before they happen in 2026.
Exactly, yeah, I would very much so. And sometimes we can have short memories and forget what last spring was about, until we're suddenly in the middle of calving and we realize, geez, we had this issue last year. So now's the time to be thinking ahead. Had you a disease outbreak, or had you a scour outbreak, or can you try and reduce that burden? And again, a lot of it might come back to poor husbandry. Maybe look at the option, if weather allows, is to get maybe cows and calves out to grass, can reduce pressure within sheds, that kind of stuff. Look at simple stuff, but again, nonetheless, maybe have a chat with your vet. Especially if you had an issue with disease in the past, and seeking to try and alleviate that into the 2026 calving season is very, very important.
And for farmers considering purchasing calves this spring, Niall, how can they prepare dairy beef calf facilities?
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of dairy beef farmers primarily buy calves in the spring, as you mentioned, and that can sort of happen maybe in the next 4 or 5 weeks, depending on where they buy their calves and that kind of thing. So it's important maybe now to be clean and prepare calf rearing sheds, before calf purchased. Stock up on veterinary supplies, maybe, scour sachets. A lot of farmers vaccinate for respiratory diseases when calves are brought onto the farm. So getting them in stock or getting them ordered, or having a chat with your vet again around those issues, getting electrolytes, having them on stock or having them in store. And I suppose if you are looking at electrolytes for 6 calves, is having a clean stomach tube, that maybe these calves need to be stomach tubed if they're very sick, having these to hand, because often the stomach tube is needed. You go out to the shed and you see a sick calf, but it's important now to be thinking ahead and have that to hand, I suppose, ahead of the calf rearing season for dairy beef farmers. The basic things: complete a shed equipment maintenance, in terms of servicing feeders, look at water trucks, water heaters. There's a lot of electric and gas heaters used on farms, or maybe the mobile trolleys and that kind of thing, and just make sure that they're working properly and functioning, in order to prevent any breakdowns during the calf rearing stage. And again, now is the time to be looking at those, those equipments that is going to be used and is going to be required. And I suppose quite importantly is, when you are looking at milk replacer, purchase a good quality milk replacer on the market, and make sure that it's in date. And again, you buy it from a source that you can rely on. I suppose the big thing about milk replacers is, is calibrating the calf feeder. Milk powders, the consistency can sometimes change from batch to batch, and for one batch, the jug might hold maybe 500 grams, and the second batch it might only hold 400 grams or whatever. So it's quite important that you keep calibrating your machine during the calf rearing stage, that the calf is getting enough powder. And so too, if you're, maybe you're mixing with a bucket or a jug or whatever, just keep an eye on that you're putting a jug in a weighing scales and you know what it's able to hold. That's quite important, again, just to prevent any digestive upsets during the calf rearing stage with calves. These things are kind of simple, but they can often be overlooked. And when there's issues or breakdown on farm, it's back to the basic things that mightn't be done properly, or that could be maybe readjusted, I suppose, going into the future. So again, there are just a few simple things around the preparing for the dairy beef calf purchase ahead into 2026, Catherine.
I suppose the other thing farmers will be considering is slurry and fertiliser now in the coming weeks. When would be a good time to do soil sampling?
Yeah, this time of the year would be the ideal time, Catherine, ahead of any slurry that's going to be applied in the coming weeks. Typically speaking, it's 2 to 3 months from the last round of slurry or fertiliser, which would have been last September. Soil samples typically lasts about 4 years, and some farmers are taking more often than that. So this time of the year will be a good idea to update your 2026 fertiliser plan with some new soil samples, and that can in turn then work out your limits before you buying fertiliser maybe later in the springtime.
And I suppose cattle are housed this time of year. What else should farmers be considering now in the weeks ahead?
So yeah, so over the next couple of weeks, I suppose maybe walk farms, maybe identify paddocks, that might be suitable for early grazing in terms of having grass on them, obviously, and that cattle could be left out on them. I suppose maybe looking at identifying paddocks that could be suitable for applying slurry. I suppose if you find yourself that your tanks are getting quite full or whatever, and some basic things, maybe maintenance of fences, water trucks, drinkers, that kind of stuff. Just make sure that they're maybe in order, maybe, in the next couple of weeks, if you want to get out stock early, and I suppose that we don't find ourselves in a situation maybe in a month's months' time or 6 weeks' time that we want to leave out a few stock and we realise that the fences aren't working or whatever. So I suppose, again, maybe it might be a slightly quieter time on farms, in terms of before cows are calving or before calves arrive for calf rearing. So it might be a good idea to make a list of things or jobs that can be done, a bit later in the year. I suppose now is a good time to go out and see what's happening out on the ground and take it from there,
You mentioned that earlier on, Niall, the calm before the storm. It is going to be a busy few weeks and months ahead on farms, with calving taking place, as you said, buying in calves or lambing on some farms.
Yeah, it really is. I suppose rest and take care, I suppose, and the lead up to a really busy period where we're going to see. I suppose, look, safety should be number one on farms. Obviously, freshly calved cows can create a safety concern, and just bear that in mind that our facilities are up to spec and that kind of thing. Look, a lot of farms are going to be working long hours or maybe working during the night or whatever. So I suppose basic things, just double check that we've all the lighting facilities are in order. What we can often see on farms this time of the year, things are kind of put where they're not usually put, and they can create trip hazards and that kind of thing. So again, I suppose just try and keep the environment as clean and tidy as possibly can. Calving cameras have worked quite well in the past for farmers. Again, just maybe they reduce the need to pick it up in the middle of the night if you can just look at the camera or whatever. So again, just make sure that's working and it's, the app on the phone or whatever you're using is working properly, and you're giving a bit of time, I suppose. And again, look, it's kind of an obvious thing, but just have enough vet supplies to hand. That if we are calving a cow in the middle of the night, that we have plenty of stuff, ropes and lubrication, that kind of thing, and that we have enough of them. I think, look, again, we can overlook these things sometimes, pre-calving, we don't think about them until we need them. But I suppose, again, just to, I suppose, keep the basic things right and keep the thing moving in that direction is quite important. But yeah, look, that's kind of it on that term, Catherine.
Finally, Niall, many listeners at this stage, some of the New Year resolutions have been buried until next year, while some might be still going strong 1 week on. What 3 tips would you give to farmers to consider in 2026?
Yeah, I suppose the 3 things I'd look at: stock are valuable, and we've really seen that in the last 12 months and maybe a bit longer now. And I suppose what I mean by that is the basic things. Animal health, will lead to healthier animals that will thrive and weigh well. So focus on herd health, preventions. Make a herd health plan now with your vet and be proactive. Maybe reviewing and sticking to vaccination or parasite control. Maybe addressing one recurring health issue. Maybe you had a lot of issues with scours and pneumonias in the past, and how can you prevent them in the future? That'd be one area, the whole area around animal health. I suppose the second thing I'd look at, Catherine, is look at your farm and what is the value of a kg of live weight on your farm. Again, stock are gone very, very, very valuable, and how can we put as much live weight on the stock as cheaply as possible? So can we look at options of grazing paddocks, maybe 3 days and growing every 3 weeks and keep rotating stock. Look, grazed grass will put, I suppose, a lot of live weight gain on cattle during the grazing season, and we really need to take advantage of that. It's one of our biggest advantages as a country, I suppose, really, and I suppose this can be implemented. I suppose the motto of maybe moving stock twice a week onto fresh grass. It's kind of a simple thing, but those farmers who have gone out and really chased grassland management during the main grazing season have seen really good benefits in terms of live weight gain. And I suppose the last thing then, and quite important, is just work-life balance. Maybe getting a health check done on yourself with your local doctor, maybe on an annual basis or whatever. Just keep an eye on yourself. I suppose we're often very good to call the vet when we have a sick animal or a sick whatever, and sometimes we might overlook our own health, so that's quite important. And I suppose during the quieter times later in the year is to get some time away from the farm with family and friends or whatever. That's also quite important, I suppose, for our own mental health and well-being. So they're just a few things I would look at into 2026 to try and implement the thing and keep a positive outlook as we head into 2026, Catherine.
That's great. Thanks very much, Niall. Plenty of food for thought there.
Thanks, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Niall for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.